Tonight, Books and Books is very pleased to present Mario Cater-Freck, Simone Vega, and Claire Bruchel as they talk about the making of YES Collect Contemporary El Salvador, a publication dedicated to contextualizing creative practice from El Salvador globally through a series of 28 interviews with the world's top art experts, artists, and art fans. They will discuss how the concept of this book came about, why it's timely for the contemporary art in El Salvador, and how the process led to the publication of YES. Claire Bruchel is a curator and writer based in New York, Miami, and San Salvador, where she works as the chief curator of Marta Contemporary at the Museum of Art in El Salvador. She was first executive director of the Locust Projects here in Miami. Simone Vega graduated in fine arts at the University of Veracruz. He has exhibited his work extensively in Europe, the United States, and Latin America, including the 55th Venice Biennial in Italy. He's the co-editor of YES Collect. Mario Cater-Freck is the Vice President of Public Affairs and Corporate Responsibility for Viacom International Media Networks, the Americas, and Nickelodeon International. He graduated from Georgetown University with an MA in International Affairs. He currently serves as Honorary Consul of the El Salvador in the United States and serves on numerous boards, including the OAS, Pan American Development Foundation, and the Latin Songwriters Hall of Fame. Let's give them a nice Books and Books welcome.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. I feel like he's basically did the entire talk for us, so thank you so much for being here. We started this endeavor about 3 years ago, and I can truly say that this was a project of love. It came from an incredible place, and I feel like it's quite a hard task of asking these two guys a lot of things tonight to try and contextualize how the book came about, and also the role it's playing in contemporary El Salvador now. And I've just blanked out on my questions. So Mario, let's start with you. Can you tell us what YES means?
Well, the idea of YES, it stands, there's a dot between the Y and the ES. Yeah. So it's Generation Y from El Salvador, or Young El Salvador. So, and also the idea was to say yes as a positive and kind of like a command. Yes, collect contemporary of El Salvador.
Fantastic. Can you tell us a little bit about your role in the book? What was your role? How did this all come about?
Well, I think that it was 20 years ago when I had this idea that the contemporary art scene of El Salvador could at some point be documented, and I started to support the contemporary art scene from El Salvador when I met Simone and the gang of Adobe back in 1999, and we started to do exhibits in Washington D.C., in Baltimore, and other areas, and we started to document.
And who were they? They were an artist group?
Adobe is an artist group. Well, it no longer exists, but they all split up and they all are independent artists. But it was the first conceptual contemporary art group out of El Salvador. Okay. And in 1999, they were the most cutting edge, and I would say the ones that innovated or broke the ice with the artist scene, with the collector scene, even with the media in El Salvador. So we started to document, thinking one day we'll put it together, whether it was film, a book. We didn't really know what it was going to be, and then it became a book.
Okay, great. So how did it lead up to becoming a book? I know that you've made a lot of, you've put a lot of time and a lot of obviously financial means within that space. How did you get back to El Salvador? What drew you there? And what really happened to lead up to the making of the book?
That's a long story. That's a long story. Do we have an hour for that? No, so I was living in Washington, D.C. I'm part of the diaspora of El Salvador, Children of War. So we were sent abroad to go to school because of the situation, the civil war in El Salvador. And at the time when you came to the United States, and I won't give my age away or the date, the year that I came, the idea was this was the melting pot. And in order for you to become part of the American system, you had to kind of remove all your background. So I became a total American. I was part of the fraternity house. I was part of the all American schools. And I moved to Washington, D.C., and I knew I was Salvadorian. I would never forget that. Yeah. But I was not in touch with my Salvadorian roots or El Salvador as a part of my social scene. So a friend of mine, Alex Regalado, said to me, "You have to come and see what's going on in El Salvador and meet these crazy guys." And so I did. I went to El Salvador, and I was like in shock of the amazing art that was happening in the art scene there.
And can you describe a little bit how many Salvadorans were showing around the world at that time? Did you know of any contemporary artists showing around the world, or was it a pretty...
At that time, no, because I was not in tune or fine-tuned with what's happening with El Salvador, because I had kind of forgotten the roots. But the moment that I reconnected, it was like in one day. You go back and you don't need a lot of introduction. Talking to them, I realized there were Salvadorians like me living in a diaspora around the world, and there were artists living in, where does Paredes live? Sweden or Denmark? Denmark. So Denmark, Italy, France, a lot of them in Spain, in South America. They were everywhere, and I was like, well, that is what El Salvador is. It's a diaspora, so we need to kind of pull this together.
Absolutely. Can I get a sense of who's actually been to El Salvador? You can see. Okay, we have quite a few people, so you know the landscape. Who's going in the next few weeks? Do we have a few people? Great. We have some friends joining us for a trip. Thank you. Simon, this is El Salvador. I always say to my friends, is a very specific place. Can you give us a little bit of context as to what the space is about? Where is it? What's it like living there? You obviously still live and work there.
Well, I guess you get a lot of information about El Salvador through the news, and of course the most negative issues is what are highlighted, and of course those are also true and happening. It's a country still living a post-war. We haven't really been able to, get out of that. Like politically, it's still very complex and very polarized society. So it's really a place of contrast. We have a lot of good people and great things, and people are generally very happy and generous. But of course, then we have very violent minority, but it's very strong. And of course, that comes into play in the art that we make. Actually, I think one of the problems in El Salvador and Central America can be that the whole thing revolves around our own problems. And then when you get out, or when you're offered an opportunity to get out, it's hard to connect to other cultures and other contexts. But yeah, it is a very beautiful and at the same time very violent and complex society.
I feel like you're quite specific because you've been somebody who's been able to actually show your work elsewhere, but you still maintain to live and work within that space. Can you give us a bit of an overview of what the contemporary art scene is like in El Salvador? Is it big? Is it small? Can you give us a bit of insight what it's like to live and work there now for you?
Yeah, I feel like it's a very small art scene still. It's slowly, developing in different ways, but it's still relatively small. For us, it's most comfortable to feel with the whole Central America as a region, and there you feel that there's really more movement and there's more happening, and we're like one of those bases which has some particular things about it. So, for example, one of those things is that Salvadorian artists are very, very united and very helpful as a group. And then that's why also we've had so many collectives, which is one of the parts that are highlighted in the book. The whole thing with collectives. So we feel good working together, and that's positive. But I guess one of the problems is that we don't have the ability to go out and to access other markets. So whenever someone is able to, then it's a big thing, really, and it helps you develop a more wide spectrum of what, also your place within a bigger context. So in that way, we are still a little bit, closed, wanting to open up for sure, and slowly doing so.
Something that really struck me about this space was that it was the formal part of it was not really there, and so I think a big task of ours was to produce something that was trying to formalize what was going on in El Salvador. What was it like for you working on this book in this way, when obviously the landscape doesn't really speak the same kind of language? Was that strange for you?
Totally, and also El Salvador being such a small country, and the artists such a small group. Also, you feel like you know everything that has happened. And at the beginning of the book, when we were talking about it, about the possibility and what should it be like, I told Mario, like, because he was saying, we have to get involved the collections and where the art is collected and and everything, all the vinyls. And I'm like, man, do you sure we have all that material, to cover that? Because I don't think we're on that many, collections around the world. And he says, like, you'll be surprised. You'd be surprised. And I remember that because, I think it's true. The experience of working with the book was like, wow, there is a lot of things that have happened and are happening, and some have had an impact outside, but you never put it together. So it's because we don't have a clear structure, institutions helping in contemporary art, then you lose that sense. And then working with the book was really a way to see, hey, all this has happened a little bit historically, how has it developed, and that was very rewarding for me. Difficult too, to leave a lot of stuff out sometimes, or focus on certain things, and there's other stuff that really hasn't been written about. Also that's difficult. There's not that many, very few publications. So it's like, for us, we're very proud of this book as artists, to have the work shown this way. A lot of people from, other countries that I've spoken to, artists, are like, wow, like, we wish we had, like, Honduran artists, or we wish we had this. And the same with Contemporary Marte, the program. It's giving it structure, which is what it lacks. So you have all these people practicing here and there and not really connecting, and things like the book and the program really connect, and you can see a little bit more how you can build from that.
I also think it's really important to note that when we began the book, we really didn't look at it as a kind of a survey. I think we realized that would be a huge risk, because going in to kind of claim stake to a space is a very risky thing to do. And I think that really sparked a lot of back and forth with us. And so I think it's important that we talk about the format of the book. Mario, do you want to give us a bit of an overview on how that came about and what it is?
Well, first we looked at what I think, a disclaimer, I'm a marketing person. She's the curator and he's the artist. So I looked at the bestseller books that talk about contemporary arts, and I was trying to understand what made them the bestseller, what was the information that they were giving, who were the people that were involved in those books. So I really was looking at the marketing aspect, because I knew that Claire would be looking at the institutional curator investigation aspect, so that the book would become a resource for people who are doing investigations or writing about El Salvador. But my role was, how are we going to get it out there? What is it going to look like, or what it should look like, what it should have in the front cover. So two of the books that that made an impact on me, one of them is by Adam Lindemann, a friend, and I had a conversation with him and asked him why he chose that format, and he gave me the same answer like that I had in my head. So I thought, okay, so that's pretty much what I want to do. It's involve other people, not tell this story just the three of us, or collect all the information that we all had, and the three of us put it together and present it to you guys, but have 30 people do that for you. Yeah. So we decided that we were going to have 30 interviews, and first we didn't know if we were going to have that many, because we wanted to make sure that every person that got interviewed would be able to tell a piece of the story, so that when you read the whole book, the whole story is told. So we had to curate who was going to be in the book or not, and also people that have made an impact in the international art world, not just the Salvadoran art world, but that way people will recognize their names and say, oh, I know 5 of those people that have been interviewed, so let me read this book, because if they're talking about it, then that means it's worth reading. So just the 3 of us talking about it may not have been as probably grabbing your attention or wanting to purchase that book. So that's how the format was decided.
Great. And can you talk a little bit more about the front of the book? Because I think we had a lot of kind of talk back and forth, and also just so you know, the book
was a fight, actually.
Yeah, it was a fight. Well, it was a nice debate. The book was actually going to be a lot smaller than it is now too. It was only planned to be kind of a really kind of small thing, and it ended up being this full thing that has a beautiful hard cover. And I think, do you want to talk about how that came about?
Well, Ronald Moran was the first artist that made a breakthrough in Art Basel, Miami Beach, and we all know how important Art Basel, Miami Beach is to the world and to the art world. So he was the first Salvadorian that came, had a solo booth, and it was sold to Martin Margolis, one of the most important art collections in the world. So I think that was one of the first things that we wanted to recognize, that he was one of the ones that broke the ice or created a platform for many other artists. But his works of art talk about the violence in El Salvador, domestic violence, violence in the streets, and he covers all his installations with this cushiony white material called guata, which is what you fill pillows with or toys with, so that it's covering that edge or the cutting edge of a knife, like in this case, so kind of softening violence or making violence not look so violent, because if you had a knife that was a real knife with blood in the cover, it would be too literate. So we thought this was a good way to present a Salvadoran artist on the cover without and talk about the country's violence, which has been a lot of the topic in the art world. As you can only imagine, artists are usually making social commentaries, and if the social scene in the country is violence, well, that's going to come across in the art quite often, or more often than not.
Absolutely. And then we also had a big debate about whether the book was going to be in Spanish or not. So do you want to talk a little bit about the online version? Yeah.
Well, so first we thought, should it be in Spanish? Should it be in English? We were like, no, it has to be in English, because this book is geared towards the international market. And then when the book became this big or this thick, we realized cost-wise we couldn't really do the bilingual, because it would have been twice as big. So we did the online version. The ebook is completely bilingual. It's in English and Spanish, and it's in iTunes. So anyone who's doing investigation can download it for $5 and do their investigation. But we wanted to do this book so it would be more of a coffee table, but we also did the research on what was the maximum size and weight and width that you can hold in your hands comfortably, so that you can actually read it and not just put it on your book table.
Yeah. In other words, you have to buy it and you're not going to throw it away ever.
And read it.
And read it. It is signed. Simon, I know that it's always a little kind of tough to talk about, but I think it's really, you can't kind of not speak about it. The Civil War happened in El Salvador. Do you want to give a bit of context to that? And then also tell us a little bit about how that comes through in the book, and also the choice for it not to come through in the book.
Well, I guess the Civil War, which happened from 1980 to 1992 and lasted 12 years.
And not 9, I kept on saying 9, I'm sorry.
Don't forget, it's 12, but we just had this big event in El Salvador where Archbishop Romero, was
Beatified?
Yeah.
Beatified.
Which has been a huge event for us, because for once, it's you would think, this character is not related, is not a violent person himself, but at the end, it was his murder that started the war, and it was really the result of a much longer struggle, a post-colonialist struggle, like in many countries of Central America. In ours, in particularly, it played a U.S.-backed government against a communist-backed guerrilla, and it was a drawing line for the U.S. government, where Cuba and Nicaragua had been already turned into a communist government, and then El Salvador was definitely the place where that wasn't going to happen. So it became a lot more crude and violent. So that really developed through the 80s and the beginning of the 90s. And it really created a very different way of living and a very difficult access to the outside world. Also, at the same time, the diaspora, a lot of people going from El Salvador outside, and all those elements influence El Salvador today. For example, our main income as a country is that of the money that is sent by what we call the faraway brother, or people that lives, in Maryland, in Los Angeles, for example. So, and that's really a result of the war, of the Civil War. The gangs also are a result of all that diaspora to LA particularly, and then forming gangs against the local Mexican and Afro-American gangs. So all that's related to what's happening right now. And I guess it was very difficult for us living there. We grew into it in a way, but as we wanted to make art, then we found it very difficult to find anything, from books to materials to anything. And then once it ended, really the gangs began. So it's been like nonstop, kind of that situation. And it really plays in the work, I guess, even in a lot in artists that are outside El Salvador still, there is that element missing, or that stems from that conflict, and it comes into play in the work.
We once when we spoke, we were speaking about how some of the artists actually chose not to make work that spoke about the war. Instead, actually make work about, of fruit and flowers and things that didn't speak about the war at all. I feel like the climate's changing a little bit, where people are prepared to speak about it, but also there's a kind of like a funny humor as well going on. Can you kind of describe a little bit of those things?
Yeah, I think that during the war, it was weird how many artists didn't speak about it. Of course, I mean that can be understood. It was difficult to speak openly about many things. So, but many things got also like underneath the table, sort of happening. But it's hard to confront issues that are very much in front of you, and then when you put that in an artwork, people might reject it naturally just because you're so involved in that thing happening every day. Also, if you make that kind of art, then of course no one's gonna buy it, so that's also difficult for creating a market. During the Civil War, for some reason, there was a lot of buying and collecting happening, but on very conservative artwork. And now we feel that it's opening up. People are talking a little bit more about social themes, but I think also many artists are consciously trying to avoid being too forward, too straight on, which is sort of what we see happening in Honduras and Nicaragua. Work is so politically engaged and so frontal that you really cannot read it outside that. So I think humor really plays an important part, where you can open up the dialogue a lot more and not be so frontal, but at the same time you do play with these elements, and give it a little bit of twist. So whether it's humor or playing with the opposite, the idea is to sort of maintain, the content, but also and not sugarcoat it, but then make it more approachable and have more layers.
And I think that actually goes to a lot of your own work. We've had a lot of talks about this idea of using first and third world, those terms, which I think a lot of people choose not to use those terms, but you actually use them and you maintain that they're incredibly real. Can you talk a little bit about your use of those terms?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think that developing countries, it's really not true. So I don't think it's accurate in many cases. So it's kind of like, politically correct. I think first and third world are speaking of really like almost like two planets, and I think that for someone coming from, say, Vienna or, I don't know, Stockholm, to go to El Salvador and go to a very...
That's Simon's work there, sorry, just so you know, the spacecraft.
That spaceship.
Yeah, and this one here at the Venice Biennial? Yeah.
Which are also like sort of mixing that, like high technology and sci-fi with just like poverty and informal architecture, and just trying to kind of mix different elements, so they will also have like more than one layer, and more than go a little bit beyond that just first thing about. I think it's really important for me to have that double view, from someone who's coming from first world to go to a very third world country or very poor society is so strange, sometimes even impossible to go there to begin with. You don't even have the access to go there. Like if you wanted to go to a slum village, you really couldn't. You know, it has many rules and prohibitions, so it's a very enclosed society. And then you would have no idea what to find there and how people live, and it's like really like another world. Now, if you take one person from that slum and you take him to Vienna, to a very modern, beautiful building, even here, or they would feel like this is another world also, like this futuristic spaceship kind of thing. So I think that is something that I'm very interested in. It's not really only happening in between countries, but within societies. So between high and low societies, you have that first and third world. So I think that's a little bit more accurate. And because I'm working a lot with these spaceships, a lot coming from the space race from the Cold War, and another series coming from, Star Wars, then it's nice to have that idea of, that traveling. And in this case, for example, the spaceship is like sort of a third world menace to the first world, like all the people coming from the south, not only Mexico, Central America to the States, but also Africa and Europe. They are viewed with fear, like this huge invasion of 30 people, who will get our jobs from us. And it's just like kind of exaggerating it a little bit and making it funny, but in a way, trying to talk about those two worlds.
This is actually something that I'm going to ask both of you. This idea of kind of first and third world almost met within this book. How did that feel for both of you? Because I feel like obviously we interview people from all over, and they came together in this quite kind of formal thing. Was that strange in any way for you? How did you feel about that? That wasn't on the list of questions I was supposed to ask.
I don't think it was strange because I come from both worlds, from both of those worlds, so I can adapt in a nanosecond on the third world and the first world, or developing nation or developed nation. So to me it was very organic, very natural.
Okay.
Yeah, for me it's kind of weird to see some stuff that is just like kind of very crude, and how you feel it or perceive it firsthand, and then see it like packaged very beautifully and very clean, and I mean in a good way. It's different, but it's a very different experience to perceive the work, and a kind of short history, because the book is really talking about the past 20 years, I would say, like the emphasis in the last 10, but kind of like the last 20. So have all this like package in a way that you haven't seen it is really interesting, and it's functional that it's this way.
And something to note is that there actually is a timeline on the front page. As you open it up, there is a timeline that spans the last 10 years. So it gives you kind of an overview of the key things that we really pulled out that has happened in contemporary Salvadoran art within that time. And speaking of, one very big part of that was the Marte Contemporáneo program. This is a program that is at the Museum of Art of El Salvador, and which Mario has supported for the last 10 years. Mario, can you tell us a little bit about the program, how you began it, and
it actually started when I met them in 1999. So we started a program in Washington, D.C. when I was working at the embassy, and it was called the Salvadorian Cultural Space. And we had a exhibiting space about 1/3 of this room, and we would bring every other month a Salvadoran artist to showcase him or her in Washington, D.C. And the idea was to bring Salvadoran art to the world. But then everyone that came kept on saying, we need to have people come to El Salvador, because 99.999% of the artists don't qualify for the American visa, because it's such a difficult visa to obtain, because you have to show that you have the means and the ways and houses and jobs and family behind, so you're not going to escape the country and all those things, right? So they were saying, and the internet at the time didn't really exist, right? So they were saying it's difficult to look at magazines. We need to see people in the flesh and be able to have a cultural exchange. So after a few years of doing what we're doing in Washington, the museum in El Salvador opened up. And I know the people who, the founders of the museum, and they called me up and they said, look, we don't know or really understand contemporary art. Can you take care of it and launch a contemporary art program? So we did, and that was 11 years ago. And the idea was to bring 3 exhibits a year spring, summer, fall to bring an artist. And I believe there's Monica from TM Sisters here.
Oh, yeah.
They were one of the pioneers that came to El Salvador years ago. So we started to bring first the people that I knew and that I admire quite a bit. And we brought Bert Rodriguez from Miami. We brought quite a few people from Miami because this is where I was living and this is where I was connected. But then we made it a little bit more official, and Claire came on board, and of course she took over and has taken it to the next level.
I wouldn't say it took over, I'm just helping.
She's a control freak. So basically,
So
basically she's taken it to the next level to actually brought the most amazing programming to El Salvador. So 3 times a year we have an exhibit. We invite guests, and the guests are a combination of curators, artists, collectors, critics, so that it's not always the same kind of people coming over. There's a mix of cultural exchange. Everyone that comes has to work, so you will be working, Typo, when you come next in 2 weeks. They have to do artist portfolio reviews. They have to go to artist studios. So it's a whole thing that, and Nacho, you're also coming. So we put them to work when they come.
Absolutely, great. And actually a lot of the guests who have come to El Salvador are in the book.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about maybe 1 or 2 of the people in the book that really kind of stuck out to you? Because I feel like a lot of the people we selected had a relationship with El Salvador through the program as well. Although I'm sure you have others that you want to highlight, but...
Wow, that's hard because I mean, all 30 that were interviewed were...
Do you want to tell us a bit about some of them?
Yeah,
Who
I would
were
say
they?
the one that I enjoyed the most was Ella Cisneros, because I wanted to understand how she did what she did and how she got her CFO program, how she started, how she go from point A to point Z, because that's what I aspire to do, to do something bigger and bigger every year. So to me, that was probably one of the most entertaining interviews. The most dear interviews were Tom Healy and Amy Capelazzo, because they were the 2 people who brought me to the art world. They brought me to my first Venice Biennale, and that was it.
Yeah.
And they were the ones that also said, it's great that you want to start collecting art, but it would be better that you start a movement in your home country. And they're the ones that really changed my way of thinking. And it reflects in the interview. It was kind of like a reminiscent of how it all happened.
Simon, could you give us a little bit of context about the contemporary art spaces in El Salvador? I know that we now know about this program, but can you kind of describe the schooling as well? I think that's also quite important to the kind of art that's being produced.
Yeah. Well, regarding education, is like almost another different subject. It's pretty big, and well, we've been very limited also with the war as far as art schools, and in general because of the society, very academic and very sort of closed way of thinking about art. So a lot of people really have formed themselves either in design school or more by themselves, working in different places. So that's really one thing. Education that we could talk a lot about it, but there's a lot of limitations towards it. And then spaces, but again, all these limits, what really have made is that people go out and explore other things and other spaces. And the people I feel that are working with art in El Salvador and most Central America, if you're working with art, you're really working because you don't necessarily have any dream about it being successful or selling a lot of art or being in big collections or developing your career in this way or other, but rather confronting a lot of issues that are important to you and that you are able to express through art. So that in that sense, the scene is very like a little bit enclosed, but then again, working a lot towards the art itself, not towards a career, and that creates very interesting things. And as far as spaces and we have the museum, which is a very open space, and the contemporary program is very open to propose certain things, if not in the museum, but through the museum. We also have the Spanish Cultural Center, which really backed up the whole scene in, I would say, all Latin America for many years in a very strong way, bringing also a lot of curators, having programs to support studies abroad. So that's been great, and also a lot of exhibitions. They really started, for example, they had budgets for production that for us was like unheard of, and so that really helped a lot. Those two spaces in particular, I think have been a lot of help. As far as galleries, they come and go, and only two have been able to survive in the long run. And they need to have very different kind of art, and some conform also to very kind of not too contemporary kind of art. So
you wouldn't say that there's a dearth of spaces. You would say that it's a pretty limited. And what has that meant for the kind of art that's being produced in El Salvador generally? I'm sorry, I'm speaking in the very general terms, but I think we're doing it for the sake of.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I guess in a way people have really done like in other places that you start creating the spaces, a lot of them in an ephemeral way, a lot of exhibitions happening in the street, in a parking lot, in a house of someone, and that really helps to create work that relates to the space in a very different way, and confront certain issues in a different way also, aside from this like sort of white cube idea. So that I feel that's something very particular about art right now. A lot happening in the streets, in certain plazas, in contexts that have some sort of historical meaning to it, and that makes for fresh proposals as well.
Great. And I think it also feeds into a lot of the themes that were in the book, and we came up with 4 themes. Mario, do you want to talk a little bit about those themes, if you can remember? Internet, war,
war, diaspora, internet.
Yeah. And
I always forget the 4th.
we always forget the 4th one. So if anybody
diaspora, internet,
and
no.
gosh, we can't remember.
Somebody open up the 3rd page of the book,
we've
please.
We've been working on this for the last 3 years.
I know.
So do you want to talk a little bit about those themes and how?
Well, the idea of the
internet
book was to become an investigative tool, right? So if you're investigating about the context of war in the contemporary art scene of El Salvador, there's a little icon throughout the book that tells you that that topic is being talked about. Or if it's the internet, or if it's a diaspora, and I really don't remember what the 4th one is.
Me too, we have to look back.
So there's 4 little icons that...
No, we said the one already.
No, that's the one, yeah.
We'll get back together.
So you see the 4 little icons throughout the book, so that visually it's easy to recognize. So if you're doing some sort of research, we kind of highlight it for you, so that you can just read that section.
Absolutely. And I also think what is good to note is that we didn't look at El Salvador as a place. We definitely looked at it as a much more open space within the world, and I think that was really important because it didn't limit us to only speaking about art within El Salvador itself.
Right, and it's not just about artists in El Salvador, but it's Salvadorian artists, and you will see that we interview 5 artists. Simon is one of them, and then there's Retna, who his mother is from El Salvador, and he was born in Los Angeles, but he feels Salvadorian and he identifies with El Salvador roots. And in fact, all of his graffiti are based on Mayan hieroglyphics. So it tells you that he is very connected with the roots, and he feels, as Salvadorian as I do, and I was born in El Salvador.
Absolutely.
So there's you can see this diaspora in there very easily. Same thing with curators, same thing with collectors, people who, some of them like Christy Turlington, who is half Salvadorian, born in the US, started to collect Salvadorian art because of her roots to El Salvador. So she's been interviewed as a collector. We have Professor
Harper Montgomery?
Kenzie Cornejo.
Oh, yes.
So she's also Salvadorian that lives in North Carolina. So we kept on finding all these jewels, all these amazing Salvadorian people around the world, artists, collectors, intellectuals.
Absolutely. Before I open it up, I think it would be apt to speak about the art, because we are obviously inviting you to collect art. Are there any specific artists within the book or artworks within the book that you feel really stick out for you? Because I know that obviously
All of them.
All of them.
Well, I think we spoke, Simon spoke a lot about his work. I would have picked Simon, of course, not only because he's here,
He wouldn't
but
have
because I have seen his progress since 1999, and I've seen almost every one of his exhibits, I think, or at least 9 out of 10. So I think I could talk about his work. Retina would be one of the ones that I would pick because I think it's fascinating how somebody who was not born in El Salvador and has become so popular around the world, everyone I think knows Retina, the graffiti artist. I go around the world and people have Retina photographs in their phones, wherever they've been to Wynwood. The first thing they do is take a picture there, right? And that the fact that his influence is part of the Salvadorian culture is amazing. I think one of the things that this book also did that is worth mentioning, at the end there's an index of Salvadorian artists from around the world that you can see and go to their websites and learn more about each one of them. I think that index is very important because although we limit ourselves to interview only 5 artists in the book because we wanted to interview people from different fields within the art world. You can actually do a little bit of homework by going to the back pages and see that index.
Absolutely, absolutely. Simon, anybody that you feel like we should be aware of, and don't list all of them. Obviously, I think it's also something to mention that you showed at the Venice in 3 years ago, 2, and that there has been 3 other people that have shown as well from El Salvador. Do you want to talk perhaps a bit about their work, Walterio Erejeta and Mauricio Cabestón?
Yeah. In Walterio Iraeta and whose images photographs here is that Supergirl from Guatemala, and Ronald Moran are 2 artists that really have been able to and before me to project themselves internationally and really have different bodies of work. Particularly Walterio plays around with very different kind of things, and he's like very, very professional and very clean kind of artist. We're all very different. We were all in the same collective, but I think we're very different. But yet we are very able to work together. But Walterio's work is I think very influential in El Salvador for a lot of young artists. There's a big movement of drawing, like very classical drawing in El Salvador, and he's like one that has inspired a lot of these people. And then Ronald, who did the cover of the book and who has handled very successfully that series and also has other very interesting work that I think very different from this series that you can see there in particular. And I think it's important to speak about that versatility in this artist and being able to take this work in different contexts further than Central America. I'm really myself also very into Irving Morazan's work, he lives in New York, and he does these headdresses which are also inspired in Maya culture and priests, which he researched a lot, but then he builds the headdresses with found objects, or very also beatboxes, and does these performances which are very, very engaging. And I love his work, and it was very interesting that we met, all of us, in an exhibition that we talk about it in the book. It went from El Salvador to New York, 4 or 5 artists working in New York, and then 5 artists from New York working in El Salvador. That kind of exchange it was really good for us, and then that's how we met him and his work through curator Jose Ruiz. Those artists, Irving, I really like his work in particular, and we're very close, and I really like Walterio's and Ronald's as well.
Okay. And he's, I think since then he's been back to visit El Salvador a few times, which is great. So he's actually reconnected with the space too, which is really important. Right. On that note, I'd like to open it up to some questions. Does anybody have any questions about the book for these 2 Salvadorians? I'm not seeing anybody asking any questions. No?
Have any questions?
1 question, 2 questions, there we go.
It's not specifically about the book, but
sure.
More like since you've seen this kind of trajectory happen, what do you kind of see as the next phase? Like what are the younger artists like? What are they influenced by, or what are they feeding from, or what do you see happening?
All of us? Well, I see a huge tendency. Well, first of all, everyone that has come to El Salvador, like you, has made an impact in the art community. 2 years after you came, we had performance artists in El Salvador. So what I see is this desire to become artists, and they see that artists can be recognized in international platforms, like Simon has been able to be recognized, like Ronald, like Walterio. They see that you can actually live as an artist. So there's more and more people coming out and taking their artistic careers more in full, more serious. I see also a need for multiple spaces around the country, not just the formal institution, but what Simone was describing in maybe historical places, in the streets, in the plazas. So like you see here in Miami. So I see that evolution coming very fast. And I think even though the internet has opened up some dialogue, they still need the flesh, the real person to come to El Salvador. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult question. Also, like if you would ask it here, like what's the next phase for Miami, it wouldn't be too easy. So many things happening, you feel. So, but I mean, I think the artist, I think also the book, very importantly, is talking about certain connections that are necessary and ever more important. So I think that's a little bit in the future for us, is to try to solidify the ones that we have now and try to make more between artists not only in Central America, but for example, I mean, it's like for me, when I came to do the first residency here, I was surprised, like how come we are not interacting with Miami? I was surprised that I mean, it's almost like the capital of Latin America in many senses. Yet we never thought, we were not thinking about coming to present or sell work here. Now I am. Now I'm like, okay, this is happening. Also, artists coming from Miami, I think I feel that has started, and now it can continue in a better way, also better organized, and have different points of connections that even not necessarily are all art. Experience and surfing and other things that can also make these bonds and these connections that are very important, because for us we tend to stay a lot inside, not be able to go outside. So I think in the future, the best thing could happen was a little bit more opening, make these connections abroad, and then have them come a little bit more to El Salvador as well.
And I think just to speak to that as well, I've been there. I've been going back and forth for. I think I did my first show at the museum 5 years ago, and I think even since then, a lot of the artists have been going to programs elsewhere. Crack Rodriguez is going to Switzerland in a month. You've been on the road consistently. I can never get hold of you. Always on the road. So I feel like things are starting to happen. Ernesto went to China, Mexico, and So I think those kind of things are starting to happen. Is another question over there?
Yes, I wonder if there's a connection between you're talking about this. Most of the artists making a connection with artists. And I'm wondering, because you're talking about exploring different types of spaces, larger spaces, urban spaces, walls, historic buildings, if there is a movement to begin to link other arts, like music, theater, and architecture in the country, if there is the contemporary is interested in also sort of cultivating those links, not just the two worlds, but also other types of artists.
I think just to speak to that in context of the program, I think that we've been specifically trying to choose works that within the arts that bridge those gaps. However, I would say that the contemporary art climate is still pretty conservative. And so it's been difficult to do full-on, I think, mixes. And so I think it's that kind of conversation is starting to happen, but I definitely feel that it needs maybe a few years to grow into being able to develop those things. Also, I think we've been kind of so specifically on one path, trying to develop one part of the art community, and we're doing kind of a lot with a little. And so I think the fear is that if we diversify that support, it's going to be spread too thin, and so our focus has really been on the arts. But we do try and, as you said, engage works that have other kinds of creative means going on. So there's dance, other things within the visual arts. You guys want to answer anything?
Yeah, I guess production-wise, you want to engage with other disciplines, and we do in a very organic way. And I guess a lot of things that are happening are like non-institutional and kind of sprouting here and there. So you get those mixes, but it's not so easy to identify them. But it is important, I think, to have that. I mean, I think in art in general, just to open up a little bit more.
Any other questions? So I think we should leave with one word that we all have learned, which is the word ba, which means
Everything.
Simone, everything. Thank you so much for joining us. Ba, which is a Salvadoran word. Thank you.
And yes, collect contemporary. Yes, buy the book.
And the books are for sale in the bookshop. They are $45, and we have some available next door, and they are available online at yescollectcontemporary.com. Thank you.